But at the end, we'll have that Q&A session I mentioned and turn the recording off during that time so everyone can talk more freely. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our host, Shelley Delayne, and our guest, Sarah McDugal. Shelley is a single mom to a 9-year-old daughter. She's presented for South by Southwest, TEDx, and appears as a guest on podcasts like Cyber Safe Teen and Healthy Screen Habits. She's the chief mom at Pinwheel, collaborating with organizations like the Digital Wellness Lab, which is a project of Boston Children's Hospital and Harvard University. A major part of her job is researching the effects of technology on children and then sharing that research with parents. Shelley and I are welcoming Sarah McDugal today. Sarah's a mom of 2, as well as a speaker, an abuse recovery coach, and author of multiple books, including Myths We Believe, Predators We Trust, and One Face, Shed the Mask, Own Your Values, and Lead Wisely. After several years working in post-trauma advocacy, Sarah co-founded Wilderness to Wild at the beginning of the pandemic to provide accessible resources to mamas recovering from trauma in the faith community. Wilderness to Wild provides coaching, courses, and community for women after abuse, as well as brand new, first of its kind, mobile app with resources and toolkits for trauma mamas. Sarah will tell you more about the app today. We're so honored to have you with us today, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Yes, thank you so much, Julie. You always welcome everyone so nicely. So today we are here to talk about parenting after trauma and where to begin and where to go and all of those things. And I, for one, am so excited to have Sarah here because the first time I talked to Sarah, my first thought was, oh gosh, I wish I had met you when I actually was in the beginning stages of that journey for myself. So even in hindsight, I've already learned things from Sarah, and I am grateful that we have this opportunity to talk and to talk about where to begin. So Sarah, if you want to say hi and tell everyone a little more about you and how you got on this path and why we're here.
Right. Well, thank you, both Julie and Shelley. I'm just getting to know you, Julie, but Shelley, you and I have talked several times, and I just feel like it's kind of like this kindred spirit thing going on. If you ever watched Anne of Green Gables when you were little. Now, for me, I just want to say right up front, I work with trauma mamas. So that is my niche audience. I know that there are probably going to be dads who are on the webinar or mamas who are working on parenting after trauma, and it may not have come from the trauma in your family, may not have come from marital trauma or family trauma. Maybe you're an adoptive mom, or maybe you're a foster mom, or maybe there's children that you're wanting to have this webinar, like to discuss this topic. And it's not necessarily your own family trauma, but they have come to you with trauma or outside trauma. So I want to make sure that you know that most of the things we talk about today and anything I share, if it doesn't immediately apply to you just the way that I'm saying it simply because I just work with women, definitely feel free to take those tools out of it and apply it to however your family structure needs it. I don't want anyone, like dads, if you're watching, I don't want you to feel like I'm not speaking to you or that you aren't just as valuable as moms. So I kind of want to throw that disclaimer out because I know we may have a mixed parent audience. But what I do is work specifically with trauma mamas, and I still are, I've got my verbs of being all screwed up there, a trauma parent, and went through the process of becoming a single parent very unexpectedly and very painfully. And after over a decade of marriage, and I had very little children and just had to start over from scratch in the middle of all of that, while deeply concerned about our safety. And when you have that kind of life experience, you begin to look at the world in a very different way. And it's very easy to start to see threats where you never saw them before. And a lot of those threats are actually valid and you were just blind to them before. And sometimes those threats are actually just boogeymen and they're not real. And it's important to be able to not live in fear while still creating safety for your children. And the thing that we often forget is that when we're going through trauma, our kids are too. And so if you have been through something very hard, or your kids experienced something very hard before they came to you, they are trying to make sense of those same things. What is real danger? What is not real danger? Where are my limits? Where are my boundaries? And so parenting after trauma is a very unique mixed bag of assets and deficits and needs and strengths and weaknesses and insights and terrifying things all the way around. So what we do at Wild, I have a co-founder who is an ITR certified, it's a instinctual trauma response coach. And the two of us work together. We're both survivors of trauma. And her name is Coach Bren, and I'm Sarah. And we work together to create safe community and online courses, and now the app that we're getting ready to launch. And you'll see what courses. I just completely lost my train of thought. Courses, community, resources, just a ton of online tools. And we actually launched this right at the beginning of the pandemic while I was in chemotherapy, because I also, after all that trauma, I got cancer. And so yeah, life is a little bit crazy, but we have been able to turn that crazy into tools and resources that are practical and bite-sized for those who are going through all of this stuff. So
that's beautiful. And one of the things that came to me while you were saying all of that is, one of the things that I love about all of your resources and approaches is that it's very reassuring that no matter where you are in that journey, you can get to a place of creating a good life for yourself and your children, and it'll be okay. And that's so true. And when we first talked, and we're talking about like what to even talk about in a webinar, because you and I have agreed that we could nerd out for probably days about all kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that you were very clear that a good place to start is about understanding safety. And I loved when we talked about safety, and one of the first distinctions that we made is the difference between created safety and coincidental safety. And that's something that we're going to be relying on a lot during this discussion. So I just wanted to set that framework for everybody, that we talked about the difference between coincidental safety, which is when you assume that something is safe, and something is safe because of circumstances or because it just happens to be safe, but not due to any action of yours. And often you're not even aware of whether it's truly safe or not safe. You're not really looking at it. And then created safety being when you really looked and you're dealing with the reality of what there is, and you are making choices that consciously create safety. So like even in your house, if you happen to have a door that automatically locks when you close it, well, that's coincidental safety. The door did it for you. But if you have a door that you have to actually walk up to and turn the lock, and then you know it's locked and nobody's coming through that door, you have created safety. And funny enough, the locking of doors is definitely one of those things that for me, when I'm feeling unsafe in anything, like check the doors, like somehow that's always reassuring. So it's always the metaphor I go to.
Right.
So one of the first things to do to get yourself to a place of calm and being able to approach getting out of an unsafe situation, if you're in one, even recognizing that you're in one, in creating safety after that, all of that, first you have to understand what safety is. And I love that you have distinctions around where to start with safety and I was hoping you would talk a little about your hierarchy of created safety and where to begin with safety.
Absolutely. Safety is such an important conversation. We know that very often the amount of trauma someone experiences is directly related to their expectations of the level of safety they were supposed to be having in that moment. For example, if you are a journalist in a battle zone and fight breaks out around you, you are very possibly going to experience some kind of PTSD, especially if you're there for a prolonged period of time. But you went there knowing that you were going to be a frontline journalist in a battle zone, and you mentally signed up for putting yourself in harm's way in order to get the story. If you are asleep in your bed, safe at home, far from the front lines of any battle, and you wake up, and let's just say you also live in a neighborhood where a firefight has never broken out before. This is not something where, well, this happens every now and then. This is completely foreign to you. And then there's a firefight that breaks out around you, and you're hiding under your mattress, and you're terrified for your kids, and you can't get to the bedroom down the hall to protect your children. The amount of trauma that is experienced based on your level of the expectations of safety for the journalist versus the person who is at home sleeping in their bed and can't get to their children is going to be monumentally different. So when we are going about our individual day and we discover that something we thought was safe suddenly has been ripped away and has been we have this disclosure that it is very much the opposite of what we believed it to be, even if it's something far less traumatic than a frontline firefight and bullets whizzing over your head, you can experience intense amounts of trauma response. The same goes for children. If you have thought as a child that your home was safe, and then something happens that proves that the person who loves you is not safe. The person you thought would protect you did not protect you. The person you thought loved your other parent has now attacked your other parent, and you've watched that happen. Or if you were at church or at school or in the family environment, and you were exposed as a third party to something, maybe someone didn't do something to someone, but you saw it on television, or you saw porn on your classroom's phone, and it was violent and it was in your face. And these are traumatic experiences. Both parents and children experience these as trauma. So the first thing that I think we need to differentiate, or to just to make a distinction about, is that trauma is not necessarily how bad the thing was that happened. The amount of trauma experienced is very often tied to how safe we expected ourselves to be when the bad thing happened. And from that perspective, it's actually quite rare to grow up without any trauma at all. And some people's trauma is a lot more exponentially damaging and harmful to their experience than others. So when we're talking about safety, we have to look at what were our expectations before the safety was lost. Now, if you happen to be a person of faith who lives in a faith community and who's actively involved in a faith community, then you generally probably assume that your church or your synagogue or your mosque or whatever, it's a safe place. It's a place where you can let your hair down and you can let your kids run around without supervision because you are with like-minded believers of your type of denomination or your faith structure. When we are looking at outside of that faith community, we assume that we will have safety in our finances. We assume that marriage will be a safe place for that we won't need to have legal intervention in our marriage, that marriage will be a safe place for our emotions, a safe place for our children to grow up with a partner. And when those things are ripped away, whether it's in the faith community or in the secular community, whether it's finances, legal safety, emotional safety, psychological safety, physical or sexual safety, we have to look at how much did this impact me, because how safe did I believe I was before I found out I wasn't? That's question number one. And then what are the steps that I need to take in a hierarchical order, sort of like there's a strategic order of how to get safe and where do I need to start?
I love that. Thank you so much. That was just a lot there. I actually have a feeling that after this, I'm going to end up watching the webinar again, just so that I can absorb that again.
I apologize in advance. I don't do sound bites. I am physically incapable of sound bites.
Me too. There's somebody that I was talking to yesterday, actually, who is one of those infinitely quotable people who just instinctively speaks in sound bites. And I'm like, how do you do that?
I don't know.
Anyway, but one of the things that occurs to me on that is that one of the things that I have observed and hear a lot about with parents when it comes to their kids and technology is that a couple of things. One, parents, when we're using our phones or our online or things of that sort, we actually often don't recognize the steps that we take to keep ourselves safe. Like when there's a sketchy link, when there's an adult website thing, when there's a search term that's likely to lead to things that are not great, all of these things, we're so accustomed to filtering that out and navigating around them that we don't even recognize that we do it. So one, the digital realm and using devices feels pretty safe to us because we're doing all of these things. We have the door that automatically locks behind us in our brain. We don't go wandering as the same way that kids do. And that when our kids are using devices, they're usually sitting on a couch or sitting on their bed and their body is in a safe space.
Yes, that's huge.
It is. And so we have this, like you were talking about, we have this expectation of safety. And then when it turns out that a kid has seen something that is traumatic to them, and that's so common, it's crazy. But when something happens to a kid in a digital realm or on technology that is not safe, it's often super traumatic and shocking, just because, like you were saying, you have this expectation that it's safe, and they were sitting on the couch, they were perfectly safe, they weren't,
mom was 2 feet away or standing in the kitchen.
Exactly. They weren't walking around downtown at 2:00 in the morning. They were sitting on my couch. So so that difference between the expectation of safety and what actually happens is so important. And I'm super glad you mentioned that.
Well, I'm glad I did too. It's like the difference between, to use an awful kind of triggery, perhaps, illustration, but it's like the difference between being raped or assaulted after a party downtown while walking past a dark alley where you would think, oh, this is kind of scary, I need to hold my purse closer, let's get past this area, versus someone coming in and raping you in your bed and assaulting you in your bed. Because then where are you supposed to go? You're going to move out? Like, you can avoid going back to that street downtown. You'd be like, that really bad thing happens to me there, I'm not going back there, I don't feel safe there. But what if that happens in your bed? Like, are you supposed to permanently no longer feel safe going to sleep in your own room? And that can happen when those things take place in a space where we have the perception of safety. So from that perspective, can I keep going on this?
Absolutely. Keep
going. I don't want to cut you off here.
I'll wave if I've got something I need to interject.
Just jump in.
I do that.
So, yeah, it's all right. It's good. So when we are looking at creating safety, it's incredibly important to understand that safety has to come first in the physical realm. If you are physically unsafe, it becomes almost impossible to get emotionally, psychologically, and mentally safe. Quotable quotes, sound bites include things like, you cannot heal while drinking the same water that made you sick. You can't breathe poison air and have your lungs repair. So you have to be out of the physical danger in order to be able to work on the emotional and mental danger. So when we have kids going to school who are living in abusive homes, and then we wonder why they're doing poorly in school, well, that's because they keep going home to that every night. And so it's a reset to try to move forward every morning. If we have, it's hard to perform at your best at an abusive workplace. If every morning you walk into a toxic workplace and you're like, I'm going to do my best today, and it's a toxic, poisonous environment, it's really hard to do your best. So when we talk about the stages of healing, and this is a whole different thing to get into, but there are 4 stages that we teach at Wild of the seasons of healing. And there's safety, stability, strength, and Shiro. So you have to get safe before you can get stable. You have to be safe for a while to be stable before you can get strong. And you have to be safe, stable, and strong for a while before you can turn around and really help others and be a warrior. So when we're looking at safety in the home, as a parent, if your child has experienced trauma, then their sense of safety has been violated. Making sure that they feel physically safe is step number 1. Now, if you are a single parent and you have had to escape an unsafe situation, this can be a long haul. If your child has experienced bullying or something unsafe outside of your home, you can do your best to make your home a cocoon, a refuge, and a safe haven. In order to move on from that, if we're talking about adults, once we know physical safety, the next step is financial safety, because it's almost impossible to feel rested and to feel like you can move on with other parts of life if you don't know how you're going to pay your bills. Once you have physical and financial safety in place, then you can work on emotional, psychological, and sexual safety. Now, sexual safety can be achieved in the physical realm by getting physically safe. But emotionally and psychologically, there are ways to feel sexually unsafe, even if you're physically safe. And that can come with technology. A private school that I know of recently did a poll just this term about depression and anxiety. And they had some students feeling very depressed and ended up having to have intervention based on attempted suicide. And as this came to the attention of parents and teachers in the school, they did a poll about depression and anxiety. And 93% of the students in this school on an anonymous poll reported that they were consistently struggling, this is 9th to 12th grade, with depression and anxiety. And the biggest factor was the amount of time spent on social media. Now, I know, Shelley and Julie, this is not shocking news to you guys, but what amazed me was the number of parents who were like, what? Wait, what? This is a thing? I didn't know. And to their credit, they're now working on bringing in experts and therapists for the students and doing mental health programs and stuff like that. So they've taken that and run with it, and it's great. But so many parents don't realize that their kids are living with a lack of safety emotionally, psychologically, sexually, and it can lead to physical lack of safety too.
Yep.
Go for it.
And
Your turn.
I was just going to say, that's just one school. But if you talk to any teacher or administrator of any middle school or high school in America, any of them, and in Europe, I can't speak to the rest of the world. I've only looked at the research for
UK and Australia are on par with the US.
Oh yeah, definitely Australia.
And Canada.
Also. Absolutely. And they'll all report the same, that kids are struggling. Their parents have no idea. And it's really shocking. And that's why, like, I get to the, like, but I was in the same room with my kid, and okay, resisting the urge to go with some of the really terrifying statistics, because we are here to create safety, not to create unsafety. But
sometimes we have to have a wake-up call first, though, you know.
Yeah. Some of the things that kids do online while mom is in the same room would turn your stomach. And I mean that literally. It's horrifying. And it's not because, and in that realm, it's going back to the created safety and coincidental safety. Coincidental safety in technology and in digital realms looks like, oh, but my kids are good kids. They're not looking for trouble. They're too young. They're not. I trust my kids. My kids aren't going to go looking for pornography. My kids know not to talk to strangers. Like, they know it's fine. And look, they're sitting on the couch. They're not moving. They're not crying. They're not looking like they're traumatized. And the trouble with that is, it's not like the web and apps and social media are inanimate objects.
Right. They're escalating algorithms.
And people who are out to see how many kids they can ping because they're looking for something. And wow, online makes it real efficient for them to reach out. And if they find a vulnerability, like, knock it off so quick. And so, yeah, the first step in creating safety with kids and technology is just that awareness, like just that awareness, just parents understanding that letting their kids roam around anywhere with access to the web without them being aware of what their kids are doing is not going to be safe. It's just not going to be safe. In one way or another, it is not safe.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of like we get this idea when we're talking about driving. Like, I trust me as a driver. It's the other drivers on the road I don't trust, because somebody else may be going crazy or has a heart attack behind the wheel. I mean, it might not even be malicious, but they could still run into me. And if I'm not paying attention, it's a life and death matter. So when we're talking about tech safety and children, you might trust your kids, but do you trust every friend of theirs who has a phone? No, you can't. I'm thinking of two different experiences where mamas came to me, and one of them called me just horrified. And she's like, oh my goodness, I need help. You will not believe what happened to my son yesterday at church. And so she was serving as like a deaconess in their particular faith community. And so she was like up helping take care of a bunch of things. It was her turn that weekend to take care of things. And dad was running the audiovisual in the little audiovisual booth. And their son, who was like 10 or 11, was sitting in the very back pew of the church within dad's sight. Like, he's like 5 feet in front of dad from the booth to the back pew. And there's like 4 boys from his private school, and they're all friends, and they all have the same family get-togethers and whatever. And one of them pulls out his little iPad mini or his phone or whatever, and it's got a cell connection instead of the filtered church Wi-Fi. And he looks up something that is hardcore porn and hands it down the road. hey, look at this, in the middle of the church service, while mom and dad are within 30 feet and direct supervision. And that was their son's first exposure to hardcore pornography. Another single mom, 4 kids, and lived in a very, very conservative, sheltered farming community, like out in the country. And the one thing that this particular homeschooling family did, like her kids were with her all the time, all the time. And so the one thing that her homeschooling family did was go ice skating. And so every week they had a thing of ice skating. And when her 3rd kid or so was around 7, she had asked me what books she should get to start sharing and having some conversations with her kids as they were getting a little older. And so I suggested one that I happen to love. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And it's great for just starting that conversation with your kids about what is good and what is not safe and not safe when it comes to pictures and images. And it helps break down the brain science and everything in a really great way. And she's like, I need to be the first one to like introduce this topic to my kids now that they're like 7, 10, and 12. And then, the baby's too young for this. And she finds out for her 7-year-old, it was already a year too late because another kid at the ice skating rink had pulled out a parent's phone and had been showing her child hardcore porn while the family was there for like their one homeschool activity, community socialization thing. And it's not that she should have never let them hang out with anyone. The mom didn't do anything wrong. It's just that in today's world, you can't guarantee that your level of caution is going to be enough to keep your kids from getting exposed to things that they don't have the maturity and the emotional tools to handle, whether that's violence or sex or language or whatever it is that you want to let your kids be older before they more tools, more emotional maturity, more stability, more sense of safety, so that it doesn't rock their boat so wildly.
Yeah.
You can't control everyone around them.
And I also, one of the things that I want to add here, just because I hear this a lot from parents, that they are then sort of morally outraged that their kids would be looking at this. And one of the things that the research shows that I want to make sure that parents understand, just because I think this gets miscategorized a lot and it affects the way parents talk to their kids about it. There are a lot of kids who are introduced to hardcore online pornography before their parents have ever even introduced the idea of sex and what that is. So what happens though is that kids see this, and because it involves human bodies doing things, they are inherently fascinated by it. And because they often don't understand what sex is and all of these things, they don't actually know what they're looking at. Right. So they seek out more of it, trying to understand it and trying to understand their emotional and their response to it. So sometimes parents come across, oh my God, my kid has been looking up pornography. They are a terrible, awful, horrible person. When really it's just that they weren't prepared for it. And that's how a kid knows to understand something. It's like, even when you have like a 2-year-old who's learning how to eat and they go through that phase of like dropping the sippy cup and it falls to the ground. And look, mom picks it up. That's funny. I wonder if that'll happen if I do it again. I'm going to drop my sippy cup again. Look, mom picked it up again. Wow, this is fun. Like that's how kids learn, is by having an experience and then recreating the experience in order to figure it out. So one of the things that Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and having those conversations and that awareness, one of the things that that does is it gives kids 2 clues. One, and you don't have to scare them. Like I'm a big fan of like, you don't have to tell them like, this is like, you don't have to traumatize them in the education process. Even
Good Pictures, Bad Pictures is really good about not
like
doing that at all. Yes, it's so good.
And so it tells kids, one, there are things you might run into that are going to involve naked pictures. They're going to involve this. They're going to make you feel funny. They're going to do things. And when that happens, here's what you do. You come tell me, and I will help you with it. And I will help you understand it. And I will help you figure it out. And one of the things that they espouse in that, and I'm just going to share it here because it's been such a huge thing for me with my own daughter, is one of the things that they advocate is helping kids find a mental image that is a happy picture for them. Like something that when they think about this picture or this thing, it makes them happy. And so if they have seen an image that is damaging or intense, disturbing, or like makes them disturbed or whatever, to teach them the practice of actively thinking about the happy image. And with my daughter, there's this silly YouTube video of a little like Pomeranian dog that's like super fluffy and gets trimmed into this like totally oval shape. They call him egg dog. It's like this 30-second video, but it's like this adorable little dog that's like super fluff and like trimmed into this oval shape. That was the happy image she chose when we first read Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And you know what? I literally went out and found egg dog stickers. And there's one on her school water bottle. There's one on her iPad case. There's one on her pinwheel phone case. There's like, she's got egg dog stickers strategically placed, and she knows why they're there. Like that's her shorthand for, if I encounter something and I am disturbed by it, I can look at this and mom cares. Mom knows, mom cares, and she'll come and tell me about it later. Like, and that has just been such a useful tool for us. So I highly recommend reading the book, but like, that's one of the things that you'll read more about, the whys and why that works and how to have that conversation, but it's a really useful tool.
Yeah, it's great. And honestly, they have the Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior as well, that goes down to like 3 years old. And I grew up very much in the mindset of a lot of, raised by boomers in the past generation, but also the same mindset of a lot of conservative faith communities where we just don't talk about that until you're much older. Now, my parents talked to me about sexuality a lot sooner than most of my peers' parents did, but it was still like this, like, do we have to talk about that kind of thing? And I mean, I decided to be completely different. I thought, you know what? We have kids who grow up watching violence, gore, and simulated sexuality in movies and cartoons and all kinds of things. And I would rather my kids not grow up watching that, but we talk about actual history and actual violence and the impact of actual violence and war. And we talk about actual sexuality and the impact of actual sexuality in good ways and in bad ways when it's used right or misused. So we used all the anatomically correct terms. And when they asked where babies came from, I just told them very mildly, age appropriate, but then they didn't keep asking like a ton of questions because they hadn't gotten an answer. Like they had the answer. And mine are in 5th and 6th grade now. And just this last weekend, a friend was over and they were playing Password. I don't know if you know that game where you're trying to give hints so that they'll guess the one word. And so the word was period.
Okay.
And so, there's like multiple, you could be the period at the end of a sentence. It could be a time period. My daughter went straight for menstruation and pain and cramps, but she's in 5th grade and we've been having these conversations, right? My son is absolutely horrified. And for the next day or two, this is this last weekend, for the next day or two, he's like, I can't believe with so-and-so there visiting in the room, you said the word period. And so he's like flipping out. And I just looked at it and I was like, you know what? Every woman in the world has a period. There's nothing shameful about this. And I'm not raising you to be the kind of kid who, when you have a girlfriend or you're a husband or you have teenage daughters where you're like, ew, tampons, I can't go get that. Like, no, this is no different than you having a penis. Like women have periods. It's part of life and birth and everything. Like, why? And this is just me. I'm not saying everybody else has to be this way, But to me, I think we should normalize the medical side of things that are just parts of life and reserve our, oh, maybe we shouldn't talk about that, for some of the other things that are actually really bad, instead of being fine talking about all the simulated fake stuff that might be, I don't know, in a Marvel comic movie, and then horrified to say menstruation cycle.
Oh my God, you're hilarious. And like, we are so on the same page. We are so on the same page. I took the same approach with mine. But I will say, like, because I grew up in a context where that was not so much the case. I mean, my mom
Right.
tried, but like my whole context of growing up in Catholic school and all of that, like it's all the things.
You mean the nuns didn't give you a thorough education?
Oh no, believe it or not, the best education I got at school was from a nun.
Wow.
She was extraordinary. She was an exception. But
That's
one
cool.
of the things that I have also appreciated with like good pictures, bad pictures, and there's a book on, you know, a series on sexuality called It's Not the Stork. And
Ooh, I need to find that one. I haven't seen that one.
It's a good one. It's Not the Stork. And the reason I loved those, they were helpful to me at the beginning stage of my journey because I had a lot of residual shame triggers around it and a lot of feeling like it was not safe to talk about, like that I would get in trouble or that it wasn't safe or that I would do it wrong or like all of these things. And I have so appreciated that there are books out there now that give you a way into it that is age appropriate, like it's developmentally appropriate, and it's so you don't have to worry about, oh, have I said too much? Where do I draw that boundary? What is it? Like there are these books out there now that are great resources for knowing like how far to go, and to not have a lot of the fear around it and that sort of thing. Because I was also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, so I had a lot around that of like, should I tell her like what could happen?
Right. And then where's the boundary? I don't want to terrorize my kid.
Exactly. But, so when you come from a trauma background, like reaching for books that help you frame the discussion can be a really great place to start. So you don't have to figure out like where those lines are. You can just like lean on the book, read the book with your kid and know that that's a safe place, and then let them ask questions. But that awareness is so important.
They'll tend to ask age appropriate questions most of the time. Like different kids, your 4-year-old is going to ask developmentally different questions than your 7-year-old will, than your 13-year-old will, if your 13-year-old is still talking to you about this. But by the time we think kids are old enough to have these kind of conversations, a lot of times by that point, they don't want to be having them with parents anymore because they've never had them when it was comfortable and they did want to know. And then your window of opportunity, man, it's so awkward and uncomfortable. And now you're like, I need to give you a conversation. They're like, stop, hold it right there. I'll look it up in a dictionary at school. I don't want to know. But at that point, the internet and their peers are giving them their education. I wanted to loop back though to something in that coincidental safety. And I loved those two terms that you've coined. I'm going to have to like get your permission to source cite that because I just love those. You know, when we're looking, just to shift gears toward actively overcoming trauma a little bit, Dr. Jacqueline Campbell is a researcher at Johns Hopkins University. And she's done a profound amount of research into domestic abuse, domestic violence, and women's understanding of danger. A lot of her research was published in a best-selling book called No Visible Bruises, which is by Rachel Louise Snyder. If this is an area of interest for you, that's a fantastic book to pick up. But in Dr. Campbell's research, she talks about how women who are living in abuse, and children too, but this is measured on women, rarely overestimate their level of danger. Now, what that means is women who are living in abusive environments typically underestimate the amount of danger they're living with in order to just keep their sanity. Because if you really step back and look at how much danger you are in, it's impossible to go to sleep on the pillow next to the person who could kill you if you're really telling yourself the truth about how dangerous they are. So we rationalize and we minimize and we diminish the amount of danger in order to keep functioning. So even in an abusive family, even in a physically violent family, there's this subconscious assumption that the worst probably won't happen. I'm banking on the fact that the worst won't happen, just so that I can continue functioning in a sane way. And so instead of making active safety planning every day, because that's a very horrific way to live, you live with this coincidental assumed safety, just hoping the worst won't happen until something wakes you up in this kind of situation. And you're like, I can't live with coincidental safety anymore. I have to make a safety plan. So when we translate that same mental approach to our children's safety online, very often we just assume that our kids will not go looking for porn. And we think that because we don't go looking for porn because it's not on our radar and our kids are good kids and they may be very good kids, that porn isn't going to find them. And what we're doing is we are assuming impotence on the part of ads, algorithms, marketers, the porn industry, which puts billions of dollars into drawing people in and hooking them young. And we also assume a lack of danger from simply tuning out from life and the addictions to technology that can be available that lead to anxiety and depression and all of suicidal ideation, loss of social skills, and all of these other things. And a lot of times, okay, if you're a single parent, if you are a single parent of multiple children, if you are a single parent of trauma kids, who can sometimes be way more difficult than non-trauma kids, if you are a single parent of neurodivergent kids, ADHD, autism, whatever, it is really easy to just be like, oh my word, this is the first time they've been quiet all day. I don't want to mess it up. And then 3 hours have slid past and you finally got a shower, got a nap, grabbed something to eat, cleaned the kitchen. And it's just like, thank God I got a minute. And so that goes back to that assumed safety because it's giving you the break you desperately and totally need. You deserve that break, but at what cost? And if you don't have these filters in place, I know, Shelley, you're like about to bust it over here because people who've been single parents, like, especially if you've got trauma kids, if you've got neurodivergent kids, if you have noisy kids, if you have kids who won't shut up like mine, like, oh my goodness, it's really easy to be like, here, take this. And then you feel like a better parent because you're not, you get your sanity back.
And you can do that. That's one, I definitely want to make sure. As long as you set up, as long as you're aware
with
and you set up boundaries.
A safety plan.
Exactly. As long as you have, it all comes back to like, as long as you have the safety plan.
Created safety. If you're doing that with the coincidental assumption that it's just gonna be fine, then time slips past, and even if it's not content, it can be addiction. And then you have far bigger issues in your parenting journey, behavioral issues, attention deficit issues, concentration issues, social issues, everything. It can escalate based on that. So I think we've talked about that physical safety, actively discussing things with kids about expectations, setting ground rules, but then also taking that further into emotional and psychological safety and sexual safety. It's not just about porn either. It's about helping kids understand marketing gimmicks. Like everything you see, somebody is showing you that cool ad because they want your money, not because you need it. it's messing with your head. So when you're like, I have to have it, mommy, that means it's working. Their focus group just proved them right. So they dropped $2 million on that ad and you just fell for it. So like, how do we teach our kids more than just, ooh, bad pictures, but also discerning critical thinking about the onslaught of information? And that's one of the things I have loved about Pinwheel, because I have Pinwheels for my kids, is that like my kids are extremely easily tech addicted. And my son right now cannot even find his phone because it is a tool to him, not a toy. And I actually like the fact that he can't find his phone and that it's probably dead somewhere in a couch cushion, because it means he's not wigging out that he doesn't have it right here with me to constantly have access to. It means he has a healthy relationship. He can put it down for 2 days and forget about it. That wasn't so great on his chore list that I wanted him to check on his phone, but he's cool with having forgotten the chore list. And I'm cool with the fact that he's not addicted to it. So we have to do more than just assume that it'll be okay. And we have to take those extra steps. It's work up front, like doing stuff with bark and setting it up and getting everything lined up at the beginning. But once you have the guardrails in, the train can stay on track. If you don't have the guardrails up, if you don't have, I live right by train tracks like 16 times a day. I'm amazed we haven't had one yet, because it is like really loud and it interrupts my podcasts and recordings. But if there's no rails, the train either doesn't run or it fishtails all over the place and it wrecks out. So really what we're talking about is not trying to remove our children from all exposure to everything. We're not saying you need to shelter them and blind them and make them deaf and never ever let them participate at anything or go to a friend's house or anything. We're just talking about healthy guardrails, because kids don't have the moral compass yet to be able to know when an exposure to something is actually going to be damaging long term. And they can have that innocent exposure and then that innocent curiosity, and they just don't know that it's poison to their mind and their hearts. So
They really don't. They can't.
They can't be expected to take that responsibility for themselves.
And one of the things that I have found Pinwheel useful for in my home, and a lot of what I do with mine is to focus on contrasts between this and that. Like, she also has an iPad that she gets to use for watching videos or for playing Minecraft or whatever, things that Pinwheel doesn't have, because it is a tool and not a toy.
Right.
But so
thank you, by the way. Thank you for that. But he would never lose it in the couch cushions if Minecraft was on that thing.
Right. But we have conversations about why this has this and that doesn't. And one last thing, because I just looked at the time, and yes, we do need to get to Q&A. But one of the things that I wanted to say, because I know that I wish I had known this sooner, especially when my daughter and I were still going through a pretty rough patch. And I felt like I was failing at creating safety for both of us. And like, I was worried that she was going to be scarred for life. One of the things, and this is true throughout history, you can read stories of people who grew up in war-torn countries and in all kinds of extremely adverse situations. Loving connection with an adult who loves you helps with resilience and recovery from, and having a foundation around all of these things. And so, because kids often experience intense things in the digital realm, or when they go out in the world, or just because they're dealing with stuff already, one of the things that I got from a book called Hold On to Your Kids by Gabor Mate and Gordon Neufeld, they focus on attachment science and all of this, but one of the rituals that they espouse in that book that I wish I'd had sooner. Anytime you're separated from your kids, whether they're at school, whether they're in the other room, or sitting next to you, but they're on a device and they're in a separate virtual world. Anytime they've been separated from you, when you come back together into the same space, look them in the eyes, unless neurodivergence makes that not a comfortable thing for anyone, but look them in the eyes and smile and just welcome them back. Have them, even if it takes 2 seconds, reconnect, because they feel that connection, and it gives them a contrast between that and the pseudo connections that can happen online or in other contexts. So, and the more they understand that contrast between this is real connection with someone who really cares about me and knows me versus this is sort of a connection that's doing something to me, the more they have that contrast, the better off they'll be in the long run. So
I love that. And I just wanted to add, because I am raising a neurodivergent family. If that eye contact and smile is not a workable thing for your family, find the thing that is. It could be a shoulder squeeze. It could be a hand on the cheek. For my son, running my hands through his hair and coming up behind him where he doesn't have to make that face-to-face contact. Don't come up behind me. I will jump out of my skin. Like, that is not a thing you do for me if you want me to feel safe and connected. Like, I will not be held responsible. But for him to come up and just run my hands through his hair and be like, hey, buddy, love you. He loves that. My daughter, don't you dare touch her hair. But if you reach over and grab her hand and just hold it, she'll put her other hand on top and roll her little hand underneath and grab mine. And there's that moment that says, I'm here and you're mine and I'm yours. And we're in real life here.
That, I think that, okay, that is a perfect place to end the recording and to transition to question and answer. That's the perfect closing sentiment. Thank you, Sarah, so much.